You're listening to Rookie Pirate Radio, the official anime and manga podcast for InBetweenDrafts.com. I'm Travis Hymas, and this is also a John-less episode of Rookie Pirate Radio. But don't worry, John will be back soon. For now, though, I'm joined by Kayla, one of our wonderful writers for In Between Drafts in the anime section.
How's it going? It's good to be here.
It is, and listeners will remember Kayla, of course, from our other anime roundtables, talking about things like Hell's Paradise, which she was also reviewing, and she's reviewing today's topic, which is Delicious in Dungeon, one of the big hot shows of the year, and for very good reason. We're going to talk about it quite a bit here in this episode, but before we do, just a little bit of admin. I have a note here from our show's always on-call producer, Rookie D Pirate. Let's see here. Great job last week not doing a whole big bit about how the internet doesn't exist or the Discord shut down or anything like that. So could you please just do that again? Oh, that's weird. I don't know what he's talking about. You know, this does remind me of a thing because John got back in town this week and he reached out to me. He said, Travis, you know, I've got all of these things that I want to share with people that I saw while I was in Japan. I found out what the One Piece is. I interviewed my actual father, Eiichiro Oda, and I want to share that with everybody. And I said, John, why did you record an 8-track and mail it to me? Which I, of course, sent back in my own 8-track, and this bit has already gotten away from me. But roundabout thing is, we do, in fact, have a Discord, and that is linked in the show notes. And it's not just the Discord for Rookie Pirate Radio, it's also the Discord for In Between Drafts as a whole. So you can check out not just our One Piece theories and tell us how wrong we are, but also an actual channel dedicated to anime. We're discussing a lot of the current season. Also, film, music, TV, games, more. We had ourselves a nice, fun clown session this week as another indie direct came and went without any Hollow Knight Silksong news. We all suffered together for that because this time even I fell for the excitement and hype and didn't happen. And you could be a part of that pity party too if you just joined our Discord. And if you're not ready to have a pity party in the game section yet, well, that's okay too. If you just want to talk to us about the podcast, about things we cover, you can also send us an email at rookiepirateradio@gmail.com. Another letter from Rookie D Pirate here. Say it again. Got it. Okay. rookiepirateradio@gmail.com. All right, that's enough of the fun stuff. We always drag out the episodes with it. So instead, let's talk about Delicious in Dungeon. Of course, Delicious in Dungeon, or Danjon Meshi as it's known to fans, is the anime adaptation of the manga of the same name by Ryoko Kui that wrapped last year. It follows the story of Laios, Marcel, and Chilchuk, an adventuring party that is forced to resort to eating the monsters they defeat in a mad dash to save fellow party member and Laios' sister, Phelan, from digestion. The party recruits Dwarf Senshi as their monster cooking expert and dive ever deeper into this mysterious dungeon. The anime is being handled by Trigger of all studios and began airing back in January on Netflix, and we have been reviewing it the entire time on In Between Drafts. Kayla's been leading the charge on that, so if you haven't been reading those are also linked on our page in the show notes. Definitely check those out. But Kayla, as the foremost Danjon Meshi expert, and yes, I'll let you call it Danjon Meshi here, how do you like the anime so far?
I'm actually really happy with how it's turned out so far. It's been pretty much 1-for-1 panel to episode, so I'm happy. There was one thing recently that they didn't include, but it's a very tiny thing that I will overlook because the rest of the first season has been so well done.
And of course, we're not done yet. We are in the second core of the series now. I believe it's another 10 episodes we've got left, maybe a little
12,
less.
Actually,
does that sound right?
I think it's 10 or 12. I'm actually not too sure.
What's great about it, though, is that they didn't dump all of these episodes all at once, or heaven forbid, dump like 10 episodes and then make you wait 6 months for another 10. I just got to get that out of the way. Good job, Netflix, for figuring out what everybody already knew about watching
They live
anime.
and they learn,
Congratulations.
as they say.
I have only read the first volume of this manga, and full confession, that was kind of in tandem with watching a Patreon sponsored episode of Atop the Fourth Wall, where they covered that volume. So I was going in mostly blind, and let me tell you, that red dragon, that first red dragon episode with the big reveal at the end. Oh my goodness! Could you imagine if there wasn't a week gap between episodes to let that sink in?
Oh, it would not have the same impact, 100%. Though you had to have that break in order for the impact to happen. And it is just so well done. And I'm so glad that they left it on that cliffhanger. So for a whole week, everybody was just kind of freaking out.
And one of my favorite parts about stuff like that in anime is, of course, the famous meme where like a really serious thing happens, and then that's what you end the episode with, because that's the best place to end the episode. And then you have to play the same ending song that you've been playing the whole time. So it's just the happiest thing in the world, like hard cut from like a skull to da-da, it just happy, like, oh, Leo's is hanging out, is taking a nap. Isn't that great? Isn't that fun? Don't we have fun here?
It's so great.
Love it.
It
It's
actually
my favorite
reminded
part.
me a bit of the episode of Firen where she's fighting against the, I can't remember her name, but she's like one of the higher up devils. And
Oh, you mean the one where she low tier gods someone?
yeah, it reminds me of that, like that whole sequence.
It's so good. There's another great one. Literally this week in Go Loser Ranger, they did the exact same thing, and it's my favorite version of that. But we'll do an episode about Loser Ranger later. I'm gonna force John to watch it. But one thing that I think is interesting, I don't know if you would agree with this, is the series is somehow perfectly suited for Trigger's kind of house style of animation, and yet I feel like they've got a little bit of restraint in what they're doing, not in like a negative way, but it feels less chaotic than a lot of other Trigger projects. Do you see that in the animation at all, or am I talking nonsense?
I definitely see it. And I think there's less chaos because they have different animators on essentially every episode, or they have, I guess, a group of animators who have taken on an episode log. And so you get the chaos in some of the fight scenes, but it's not the typical Trigger chaos, everything, everywhere, all at once sort of deal. And I think it's because not every episode is by the same animator.
That's one of those, like, they inherited that from like when the former Gynax, which is kind of the skin that Trigger wears on the outside. Where like Gurren Lagann is a good example where they would do that as well. But I think it's suitable for this. I'm actually glad that it's less elastic. I think if this looked more like, say, I invoked Promare last week for listeners in regards to another anime. If this was more like that, I think it would do a disservice to the atmosphere that is the dungeon. There is this very lived in, like, dark-ish fantasy sense here, and I feel like if they were more wacky with the animation, it would do all of that a disservice. That's what I mean when I say that it's a good thing that it's not like completely in the house style in that regard, because it would take away from those moments that really matter. That being said, some of the best reaction faces in the
10 out
game.
of 10. They
Holy crap.
really went hard with adapting those reaction images. And I am so grateful that I get to see it animated and turned into memes on Twitter every single week.
What's your favorite one so far that they've aired?
Where they get taken by the orcs and Senshi is chanting, bread, bread, bread. And he's holding on to this tiny little fence that they've trapped them in. And just the way he's holding it and the way he looks, with the subtitles that say bread, bread, bread. That's my favorite. It's just so funny to me. I cannot get over it.
That one's great. I think for me, it's gotta be the one that destroyed me the most, just the absolutely perfectly delivered punchline, is the treasure bugs when they finish cleaning that all up, and then, yeah, he's like, "Oh, what about the inedible ones? Oh, you could just toss those. That's fine. You can't eat real gems anyway," and like it's already dropping, and like their faces are just stone cold, like hearing him say it and like overlapping. It's so
It's
good,
so
like an
funny
out of body
because
experience.
the way that whole sequence works is so perfect and so in character for all three of them. It's just so funny. I love it. And also, I have to mention the frog suits. That's just such a great episode. And seeing Marcel's face when she has the frog suit on is so funny.
And they've decided that they're gonna just gaslight her about it. It's so good. Like they huddle up and decide if they just tell her she looks really cute, she'll go along with it, and it kind of works. That's so good. I like that in the background too. It's still with their equipment. I don't know if that means it's coming back. Don't tell me if it means it's coming back, but I would love a return of the frog suit.
Well, you'll have to watch this week's episode of Danjon Meshi to find out.
Oh, there's your hint. I haven't actually watched this week's episode. It dropped today as of recording, and so I have had to catch up. So I am caught up to where the last review of yours I edited, which was Sea Serpent, if I am
I
right.
think so.
Please tell
No,
me I'm right.
we have one more. There's one more
I won't.
episode.
I won't. No, it's yeah, it dropped today, right? As of time of recording. Yeah, okay. So I'm going to allow myself the fun of not knowing what that is,
Exactly.
because then nobody can say we spoiled the new episode for them. If I'm understanding right, we're probably going to adapt through the rest of this one more arc, and you've read the manga. So, how is the overall pacing? You said they're actually doing a pretty good job of like one-to-oneing the paneling. How's the overall pacing of the episodes for you?
So for me, I think the pacing works really well. I've heard or I've read people complaining that the pacing doesn't work with how the overall plot is. Like they're supposed to be rushing to get Fallen, but they're taking their time to sit and cook. So I've seen some complaints about the pacing being off and not as rushed as people would like. But as somebody who has read it and has seen what happens, the pacing is kind of perfect, in my opinion. They can't rush through too much because otherwise they'll leave out a ton of important things. There's so much foreshadowing that happens in every single episode. There's so much setup that happens that if they left out certain things to move quicker in each episode, it wouldn't work. And you wouldn't be able to watch a future episode and be like, oh, they set that up in episode 14 or whatever. So for me, I think the pacing works really well. And I think that the one for one panel to scene works perfectly. It just comes together in a really nice and neat package every week.
It's interesting to me that you mention that people think that the pacing is weird because they stop to cook. Because I don't want to do the whole nobody has media literacy thing, that is true, but kind of a meme at this point. But that's the first like sentence of the show. Like this entire inciting incident is they lose because they're hungry. So I that doesn't make sense. That criticism literally doesn't make sense to me. That is the premise. Like that's like the core at the very least of like what got the story going was they went too far without taking care of those basic needs. And they progressed so much better this time around because of those breaks, because Senshi has those skills that help kind of guide them through eating these monsters safely. if they're not doing that, there's one whole character who's not fulfilling a purpose at this point, and there's no lesson being learned like on how to better navigate this dungeon. How does that even make sense?
I ask myself that every single time I see something complaining about the pacing because of the cooking. Because, like you said, it's the premise of the entire show. Without the cooking, there is no Danjon Meshi. So, even if they're just cooking something small, they're still cooking and they're still nourishing their bodies as well as getting closer as a party, which is kind of an underrated part of it. They sit down and they eat together and deepen their bonds as the party. So it seems silly to me when people say that when it's such an important part of the plot and the premise and these characters.
Yeah, I'm loath to say that anybody is watching it wrong because it comes off like being a jerk, but I do kind of question the logic there for sure. The reason that I bring up the pacing specifically is I found myself very impressed, and I don't know if the manga does it in the same way, but I found myself kind of blown away by the fact that these are basically like most of the episodes are basically like 15-ish minute half episodes, but because of the structure of the plot and how one thing kind of feeds into the next thing, the first part always fulfills the second part. If they encounter a monster in the first section and cook that up, or they find like the golems that Senshi has turned into a garden, that becomes a driver in the second part of the episode, which ties it together. Even when the episode titles kind of give it away, with it being like named after the dishes that they make, and there's usually like a slash, which let me tell you, fun for SEO stuff. A little inside baseball there. Very fun figuring that out, anime episode titlers. But it's kind of impressive because you would normally see something like like a gag anime, for example, would do something like that. The Urusei Yatsura remake comes to mind, where some episodes are just literally two smaller episodes put together, and they're broken by like the eye catch and everything, and they're two completely separate stories. They don't necessarily even go in chronological order to each other, and and that's fun. That's great for telling the story. And I think they could have even structured the show like that, but because they don't, because they let you kind of subconsciously pick up on how it's almost like an actual like TTRPG campaign. You pick up this thing, you have this encounter, and it takes you to this encounter, and it's like a cause and effect situation. I think that makes it way more organic in its storytelling. I was really impressed with that.
Yeah, it's like you said, like TTRPG, where something happens, which sets off the next thing, which sets off the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing. And it could be something super small that happens and you don't even consider it, which is really genius on the author's part, which is probably my favorite thing about Dungeon Meshi, to be honest, because it's those little things like in that first half of the episode that connect to the second half of the episode, and it just works really, really well together.
To be super cringe and make a food analogy, it's like putting all of your ingredients together in the recipe and getting a delicious dish at the end. That one's for you, John. But it really does invoke that kind of like D&D campaign. I don't want to use D&D exclusively in this comparison, but it does kind of feel like playing D&D when they do finally catch up with the Red Dragon and kind of execute that play. It feels like doing combat in D&D, at least in my experience, where like things go bad and you're basically left to the impulses of the other people around you to see what they're going to do, and they're not, and they may not know what you're thinking or know how to react, and so it gets a little ski wampus, and that's pretty fun.
Yeah, you see it in the uh, Undine episode where Marcel is fighting with magic, and then the rest of the party is kind of scrambling to figure out the best way to help her. And it does get into a little chaotic fun time, in my opinion. But it really does just build off of what you're saying. Like it's just that D&D sort of experience.
I mean, the author has to be some kind of RPG head, right? Like, when do we find out like who her Baldur's Gate crush is, right? Like that has to come on, right? It has to be.
Well, do you want to hear something? There was a running joke that the last couple of chapters were delayed because she was busy playing Baldur's Gate. And then it came out in the latest. So she has a series of books called Daydream, and it's just like extra drawings and doodles and a lot of really interesting lore to do with Danjon Meshi. But she also included a bunch of Baldur's Gate doodles in there, and it's very clear who her favorites are.
Okay, but who are the favorites? The people have to know.
I actually haven't played the game, so I don't know the names, but I do know she is probably not a big fan of Astarion because he was the tiny little doodle when all of like the women characters were like shaded and drawn really beautifully.
Ah, I see. A person of culture. That's going to be divisive. That's going to be divisive in my household, just a little bit. But that's fantastic. So I was on the right path there. Definitely, definitely a D&D head at least. Seriously, Baldur's Gate's great. Check it out on sale eventually.
Yeah, it is on the list of games, but first my goal is to finish Elden Ring, so I'll get there eventually.
I wonder if some of those kinds of games also influence this because despite definitely having just an incredible sense of humor about itself, which some of it I do feel like comes from Trigger's animation, especially in the action scenes, but even in the choreography of combat, there's a lightheartedness, but there's a lot of stuff going on here, even in the early episodes before we even encounter the big bad, so to speak. There's some hints of some seriously dark stuff going on in this little fantasy world.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because it pulls you in as this kind of lighthearted, really fun. Oh, they're going into the dungeon and they're cooking monsters. And then as they get deeper in the dungeon, it gets darker and darker and darker. But it really does start off with the death of a main party member. So it doesn't hide itself as much as you would think, but it really does have some dark elements in it. And as the anime airs, it will get darker. And every week, I'm just like, well, we're really in it now.
Yeah, that's one of the things with like seinen anime, right? Is a lot of the times you'll either get something that's very thoughtful in its execution or it's not, and it's really hard to get that kind of like healthy balance. I do get that vibe here. I don't think I'm gonna get to the end of this season and feel the way that I feel about other series in this particular age range, but I do. I actually, I remember seeing some people online react to again the Red Dragon episode. I just think that's kind of the strongest episode of the season so far, where they tweet that they were watching this with their kids, and they're like, "Hey, does this get worse from here? Because I don't think this is gonna work." And I'm like, "How? It's TVMA. Did you not believe it?" And then you think about it. You look at the OPs, look at all the promo images, look at all the jokes, look at all the kind of just fun cooking scenes that are really well animated and thoughtful and take up the bulk of the episodes. It actually makes a lot of sense that people would be lulled into that.
Yeah, it is very wolf in sheep's clothing in a way because those dark elements are there. They're in the opening, they're in the ending, they're in the jokes, like, and but it hides itself so well, or I guess it disguises itself so well that you can forget that this is a really serious situation that these people are in. They're desperate, they're unprepared, they have to eat monsters every single week. And it's just so well done. And I don't know when or where the season is going to end, like which arc, but I just know that season two, it's going to be a whole lot darker than this season was.
So is this going to be one of those Jujutsu Kaisen situations where like people watch the first season and all they remember is like Lost in Paradise, and then they get to season two and they're like, "What? Oh, this story hates me." Actually, is that where we're going with this?
Pretty much. It's very berserk influenced in the second half, I'll say. Like it gets really dark. So it's going to be the JJK situation all over again.
So send everybody to you when they're mad about it. Got it.
They can just tweet at me and I'll like all of them.
Do the little sickos image every single time. Just yes, yes.
Yep.
You were telling me before we recorded that the end, it's a very strong ending though, because you have read the whole story. So don't give up on it if it gets dark in season two, y'all. We talked a little bit about the cooking scenes. I want to jump back to that really quick. The animation on these cooking sequences, it's almost like a cooking show. Like they've put a GoPro on like Senshi's head and he's like going through the motions every single time he's like skinning something. It's some of the best stuff I've seen in a really long time in an anime. Like, what? How did they do that? Like, stuff like that's actually really hard to do.
Yeah, it's they put a lot of effort into those cooking scenes. It is very Bobby Flay in the dungeon. And I love it. I think that the animation and the effort that they put in shows, which makes it all the more better because to have it translate from the pages to animation doesn't always work at times, but Trigger put the work in to make those scenes perfect. Like every episode, even when Senshi's grinding up something to throw into a soup, the effort is there. Like you see him grinding, you see him cutting, and it's just, oh, it's so good. It just scratches my brain.
Yeah, it genuinely looks good enough to eat. In every single, like, it really sells the the world of like the reaction, I guess is what I'm trying to say. When they sit down and they put it in their mouths and they go, "Oh, this is delicious." Yeah, it kind of looks delicious. Like sometimes have weird food things, but like they can just make scorpion tail look good. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's Senshi is Master Chef. Get him on Food Network.
Yeah, now I kind of want like a series where they put like Gordon Ramsay in front of a few of these episodes to see how much he can take of it.
That would be perfect. We need to pitch this to Crunchyroll right now.
It doesn't necessarily have to be Gordon. It could be yeah, like I said, anybody on the Food Network.
Get Ina Gardner in here.
What's Rachel Ray doing anymore? Like, let's get some cross promotion. Trigger's always in it to win it, aren't they? Everything they do is always 110%. Even if it's not like the strongest thing narratively, it always looks good.
They do put the work in. It amazes me every time I see something from them because it just blows my mind. Even if it's not something I'm particularly into or I don't think it's that strong, they still blow my mind. It's just, they go hard and you have to respect them for it.
I remember your reaction when we got the announcement that Trigger was doing it. I had not even guessed Trigger was going to be the studio that got to do the project. That did not even occur to me as an option. But I mean, how could you complain? How, like, as a fan of anything, if you were a fan and you found out one of the best studios in the biz was going to adapt your manga, you know what I mean? That's got to be wild. You were hyped, if I remember correctly.
Oh, yeah. I was so excited. I remember making jokes to a bunch of friends like, how are they gonna get them from the dungeon into space? Because it's Trigger. But I was still so excited because I knew that their stylization would work so well with Danjon Meshi. And they had released a trailer or a commercial a few years ago when it first came out. And everybody was surprised, like, oh, did they get the rights to this? Like, are they doing the anime? And it was silence. And then they dropped the official trailer, and it was hype because the trailer was amazing. 10 out of 10. I would watch it every day for like a week.
Like really for reference, that trailer came out a literal year before the anime would air, and no joke, the moment it was live on YouTube, Kayla was like in our private channels that we use for planning content and being like, "I'm reviewing this." End of conversation. You have to let me do this one. And obviously don't want to get in somebody's way, and the reviews have been great. Seriously, go read those. The puns have been so good. They're so appropriate for this show. From the jump, this project has basically been set up for success. I mean, I still can't get over the fact that even Netflix is playing ball with it, with doing like the weekly releases and everything. Like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure couldn't secure that.
Yeah, it's kind of insane when you think of it like that. Like JoJo's especially is such an iconic anime, iconic manga. Like everybody knows it. And they couldn't secure week to week, which is so wild to me. I don't know what their trigger has on Netflix, but I'm glad they're using it to their advantage because it's so good. It works so well.
I think Trigger has had a lot of success with Netflix. Interestingly enough, they had at least one other exclusive with them, if I remember right. I know BNA was a Netflix exclusive for sure, which was a bit of an experience. Again, looks great. Story, that's a conversation for a different day. But Netflix's grasp in the anime industry is getting bigger and deeper, and it's starting to feel like they're really taking it seriously now. I don't do you have that vibe at all?
Yeah, I would agree with that, especially because I think the first big kind of original anime that they had was Dorohedoro, and that was years ago with Mappa. And that I think kind of jump started their anime, not series, but like their anime section. Because after that was when you kind of really saw, like, I believe Castlevania and Devilman Crybaby, but someone might correct me on that. That might have come out before Dorohedoro. But yeah, now they've got Danjon Meshi, and I think they also came out with another new anime this week, The Grim Adventures, I think. So it's really interesting to see them take such a big part of this.
We literally just got a trailer like today, again, as of time of recording, for Time Patrol Bond, which I did not even realize was getting an anime adaptation, and it looks incredible. It's a Bones production, and Netflix is like, yeah, it comes out in May. What? Seriously? That's so cool. Like, it's it's wild that we've come so far with Netflix, because like Netflix jail is a well-worn meme, and I still don't think they're 110%. I think Scott Pilgrim, for example, should have been a weekly release. It would have done gangbusters as a weekly release instead of being kind of the flash in the pan that it was. And yet I feel like Netflix is learning that lesson right now with Delicious in Dungeon, because that's what's happening. It is growing. People are talking about it. You mentioned the memes. There is a new Dungeon Meshi meme every single week without fail. And I don't think that would have been possible without this exact release setup and schedule.
100%. If they dropped all of these episodes at once, I know for a fact that we would not get the memes that we have. And everybody on the internet in the year 2024 knows that memes are important. So it they're learning that week to week is the way to go, and we're just going back to the HBO model of the early 2000s.
Right? Yeah, it's so I've made the joke before that Netflix doesn't use statistics to decide what to renew. It uses literally internet memes. So it's kind of wild that it's taken them this long to figure out how to get anime to meme like that. But I'm glad. I'm genuinely glad to see it. I hope that we see this trend continue and it's not just like Trigger has something on Netflix or anything like that, because we could stand to have a little bit of competition in this market. Another thing that I really want to give Netflix some credit for, genuinely where it counts here, is the dub for this show. I don't know if you've watched the dub at all, but it is fantastic. They got themselves some really rock solid actors, and they do union contracts. So again, credit where it's due, Netflix. Good job. Thank you very much on that.
Yeah, from what I've heard about the dub, it's so good. I know the girl who plays Nami in One Piece live action plays Marcel, which is amazing. I love her. I think she's great. And I can only imagine how great her voice acting is. And it's just, they're really going above and beyond for Danjon Meshi. It's something I've never seen with them before with anime.
It's definitely well deserved, though. I This has been an incredible series to experience. Something we haven't talked about with it, and I do want to make sure we make mention of, is the music. I am in love with this kind of almost Celtic sounding background music that kind of sets the tone for where the inspiration is coming from, and that's made its way even into like the first OP with a Bump of Chicken, integrating that into the opening title sequence, because it really does. It helps with that atmosphere feeling. It makes it feel more lived in and enriched just through a sensory recognition. How do you feel about the music?
I have to agree. It's quirky and it works and it gives you that lived in feeling. Like you said, it sounds like music you would hear in a dungeon, and it makes the experience of watching so much more immersive, and it makes you feel like you're kind of part of it, like you're part of this party and you're going through the levels. And I think they've done a great job with the like kind of dungeony music as well as the openings and the endings. They just work really, really well for the whole series.
That second OP is so cute. Oh, we come together, we make a delicious soup. It's really on the nose, and it's so heartwarming. And it's great that it transitions into the more serious core of of the show. Again, that tonal whiplash is wonderful. It's so adorable.
I love it. I think it's so fun and it's so catchy. Every time it comes on, I have to stop what I'm doing to listen. I love it. I think it's perfect. I think the opening is just perfect in general. I know I had mentioned in one of my recent reviews when they first changed the opening. If you've read it, you will see a bunch of foreshadowing. You'll see a bunch of characters that will pop up eventually. And I love that they're putting those hints in there with this fun, upbeat, super catchy song. And everybody looks happy, and there's pastels, and it's perfect. I love it.
You mentioned your reviews again, so I'm going to circle back to them because there's a theme that your reviews brought to my attention that I can't say that I picked up on myself, and only partially because a lot of the times I was editing your reviews before I watched the episode, and that's the concept of conservation and the environment that seems to be a through line of the series. Could you expand on that a little bit for me?
Yeah. So we've seen Senshi talk about not taking too many um, dryad seeds in last week's episode. And we've also have had him in the Golem episode go and plant on their backs as well as clean up the dungeon and kind of take care of it so that the dungeon doesn't fall into ruin. But a huge part of that is also taking only what you need, but leaving enough for others, as well as the monsters in the dungeon. And it is very on the nose for the world that we live in right now, in terms of, we can say, a very general global warming sort of burning of forests and using up too much electricity, things like that. But in terms of Danjon Meshi, there's a certain ecosystem in the dungeon. And Senshi does dive into it, and he describes how there are smaller monsters who are fed on by larger monsters, and those larger monsters are then killed by adventurers, and the cycle continues. And in order to keep that cycle going and to prevent stronger, larger monsters from the lower levels from coming up, they have to leave these smaller monsters alive so that they can be replenishing the monsters on the upper levels. And that's a kind of roundabout way of saying they can only take so much before they start destroying the ecosystem and putting everybody else in danger. And it's also mentioned a bit in the episode with Haburu's party, where he says once adventurers stop going to these dungeons, the monsters don't have anyone to kind of control their population, and they go out of the dungeon and attack towns and cities near it. So it works together. Everything in this ecosystem in the dungeon relates to the ecosystem in the world in Danjon Meshi, and it kind of has to keep this balance so that the world doesn't fall into ruin all because somebody killed too many mermaids on level 3, and now nobody can control the Kraken, and the Kraken can kind of go out of control.
So if I'm picking up what you're saying, and of course, correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like the key word here is stewardship. That this dungeon has kind of sprung up, and there's obviously magical motivations. There's things going on here.
Yeah, definitely magical things happening, and that magic does kind of make everybody else pay the price, where they have to make sure that they're doing what they're doing in order to keep this dungeon going.
Would you say then that the dungeon is an invasive species, or are the adventurers the invasive species? Or is it really all symbiotic at this point?
I would say it's symbiotic, but I don't want to spoil anything, so that's all I'm going to say, because that kind of is a big plot point later in the series. But it's definitely symbiotic, where they have to work together.
Gotcha. I do like the kind of ethical dilemma that is the sword from the living armor that Leos keeps and then doesn't tell the others that it's alive, and it almost gets them killed. It kind of sets Chilchuk off and everything like that. But it seems like he gets really attached to it at first. And then only to be like, well, I guess monsters are, I guess the only way to control monsters is to kill it. But then he still keeps the sword. I'm curious to see how that pays off. But I like seeing that that again, it's in moderation. They consumed what they needed, but when presented with the opportunity to like cook one more or destroy one more, he doesn't out of affection. It really seems like he seems really taken with the idea that it's become his friend later on. It's so wholesome and good. His energy is fantastic. Uh, but yeah, it's when you started writing about it and pointing out these aspects of it, it really put it in a different context. And for me, it kind of brought it all back again to that sense of food. Where does food actually come from? Like the things that we consume. I'm speaking specifically from a Western viewpoint, of course, but we don't really think about that very often.
Yeah, where our food comes from and how our food is even made is not something we have in the Western world. I know like people eat chicken all the time, for example, and have never seen how the chicken ends up on their plate. So it really is just kind of eye-opening to have it in an anime and so open about that sort of, I don't want to say taboo, but kind of brushed under the rug conversation.
It's one of those you don't realize it's there until it is kind of thing. It's an elephant in the room.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, now for the tough questions. Who is your favorite character?
My favorite character actually has not shown up yet, but she has been featured in the opening, and she is one of the canaries who we will be meeting soon in the anime. She is an elf. Her name is Flecky, and she is just so silly. And I love the canaries. I love the elves. They're just so fun. I love the way that they've come about and their whole little group. But from the main party, I will say my favorite, Senshi. Always Senshi.
You're playing bread in your head right now as you say that, I can tell.
It's just so funny. Like that episode was just so good. Bread, bread, bread. Or even last week when he's covering Chilchuck's eyes. And Chilchuck respectively is a middle-aged man based on his race. So, and then Senshi has to teach him about the birds and the bees. It's just so funny. Senshi is the perfect character.
He is fantastic. I think for me it's probably Marcel though, because they're doing something very interesting with her early on in this story. It's almost setting her up to be kind of like a screw up character that has to learn to be more reliable. And then then you find out like what her, a little bit more about her motivation, a little bit more about her history, and it gets a little bit more curious.
Oh, yeah. She's definitely set up as that kind of screwball character who's always complaining. She's a bit bratty. And then we saw how she dealt with ancient magic. And it's a lot of foreshadowing of her character. And there's a lot of stuff with her later that is really dark that just makes her grow as a character. And you really want to give her a pat on the back and say, you did it. You should be proud of yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I already get that right now from just the fact that she's like built a relationship with Senshi, for example, is very impressive because in his perfectness, of course, but he's very set in his ways. He has strict opinions, and yet she's been able to get past that rough exterior and make some really strong points to him and get him on her side when it's necessary. He seems very much like a pragmatist at the end of the day, and she knows how to speak to that. Not in any kind of manipulative way, but in a way that I think it helps them succeed in the dungeon. Again, it kind of builds their teamwork. So it's been very interesting to see her get fleshed out over the course of the first few episodes and realize that she's not only dependable, but not in just like oh, this character gets good after like 15 episodes and they stop being a like dead weight, but that there's more to why she's doing things the way that she is doing them. And it's very compelling, especially like in that transition to the second core when they run into the lunatic magician. What an absolute MVP turn that little mini skirmish is for her. Just really cool stuff. It kind of took me aback when she reveals what her counterplay is to kind of nullify the magic at play. It was very clever, actually. Made it way more dynamic than you would have thought otherwise.
Yeah, I love seeing her kind of become this combat expert in a way. And it's that scene with the lunatic magician where she's laughing and just kind of hysterical because of the situation. And it's such a great scene because you see that change in her. You see that she is no longer as happy or as positive and optimistic as she was an episode ago.
And that makes me think about Chilchuck's change in that episode as well. He kind of has a character shift that makes him more vulnerable, which is great. And I think it speaks to your point about the pacing again, that it's very important that these people are taking the time to sit at a table together and eat and get to know each other, even if it doesn't necessarily make like, cinema sense, for lack of a better term. But like, it would be way less believable if they did this in half the time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And you kind of see that in the Mimic episode where they kind of reveal that they don't know how old Chilchuck is and they don't know much about him. And then he gets caught in the Mimic or in the Mimic room. And when they're sitting around eating the Mimic, he finally reveals his age and stuff like that. And it's really interesting with his character because he is kind of grumpy. Like he's very closed off. He's a union man who's there to get his job done, get his paycheck, and leave. And you see him change from the beginning where that's still the thing. And now he's like, I actually care about you people. Can we please head to the surface so we don't die? And I love that. I think it's such a wonderful change and such great like pacing for that to happen because they're kind of in the pressure cooker situation and they changed so much in I believe a week's time, which blows my mind.
Yeah, in those kind of like fantasy adventure settings, though, what is time, right? They've been underground. They eat when they're hungry, right? There's not a real sense of time passing. So again, that helps the show kind of make it feel like it's taking longer than it actually is. It very much to its advantage. I would say the episode count overall is probably to its advantage in the same regard. Like we've seen a lot of like 12 episode anime seasons that are strong, but sometimes feel like they're kind of blazing through things. That's not the case here at all.
Yeah, I think that not putting everything in those first 12 episodes and really rushing through works to their advantage because it makes it feel longer, but in a good way and in a way that makes sense to the situation that the party is in.
Exactly. I'm so pleased with this show. It's been a delight. What it started in January. What a fantastic way to start the 2024 year for anime. I imagine we'll be talking about this one again. Of course, you will be in our next review of it, which we'll see on the site here pretty soon. But just in general, I have a feeling we'll be revisiting this. Is there anything else you want to say about the show at this point, though, that you've watched too? Again, coming from that perspective of somebody who knows what's coming?
I would say just be prepared. It does go off the rails, and I don't say that it is Berserk influenced lightly. So there's no like triggering things, but it gets really dark. So just prepare yourself.
I will make sure I've brought extra salt then for the 5 course meal that this is going to put me through. But Kayla, thanks for filling in for John on Rookie Pirate Radio this week. It's always a pleasure to get to actually sit down and talk with you about something that is amazing and great and fun. And seriously, what a win for Trigger, what a win for fans of the manga. Genuinely, what a win for Netflix, and for anime in general. We're gonna call it here on this episode, though. One Piece will be returning this weekend. So next episode, we will be back doing our manga review chapters. And John will be back to rein me in. I promise you will be free of my total control of this podcast soon enough. But for now, we're going to sign off. Thanks.